So I'm very happy to discuss with Pavel Lurje, who is working at the Hermitage in the department of on the Oriental department, and who is not only a specialist of Sogdian art, but also mainly an archaeologist excavating in Penjikent, the best known Sogdian town in nowadays Tajikistan, and also a philologist who has edited and worked on Sogdian documents from the 7th, 8th, 9th century, and more generally on the history of Sogdiana.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy and very honored to have this discussion, one of many informal ones, but this one is recorded with my dear friend and very esteemed colleague, Étienne de la Vaissière, professor at HESS, who is great specialist in the history of Central Asia and who's written many books on this matter, including the very recent one, Asie Centrale. And who is also archaeologist and who virtually works with all the possible available sources to reconstruct the history from very tiny fragments of that.
Yes, that's a common point with both of us.
Yeah.
We are trying to reconstruct a difficult history with many, many fragments, making use of historical, philological, and archaeological data. So maybe you can first introduce the region, the Upper Zarafshan, why work on this specific region?
Upper Zarafshan is a region which is located close to the mountains, in the mountains in fact, but which is very close to the very fertile lowlands. So it is in the center of Central Asia, on the territory of modern Tajikistan, where the main river is Zarafshan, which comes from a glacier and goes farther to the west on the territory of modern Uzbekistan to the cities of Samarkand and Bukhara, which have always been a very fertile and very important region called Sogdiana, Sogd, which in fact means something lowland rich in waters. But the upper course of the river is completely different, so it is sometimes very narrow, sometimes a bit wider gorge with mountains, snowy mountains on both sides with different climate, with rather few arable lands, and so, but it was always in contact with lowland rich Sogdiana and with the richer regions to the north of it, which was historically called Ustroshana, and also to the south. And so my idea was to understand the relations, the differences, the contexts, the similarities between these supposedly poor mountain regions and supposedly rich lowlands around that.
And more precisely here at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Paris, what are you trying to do? Which documents are you?
So initially my idea was to put together all the possible different sources to reconstruct the history of that land. So from one side, it's of course archaeological sources, which I worked intensively myself. So the most highland site on the area excavated Hisarak. It's our project of our expeditions since 2010, but also other sites. And from the other side, there are also the documents of the late 7th and early 8th century, which were discovered in that area. So one of the wonderful natural conditions of that land is that the organics survive, which are normally lost in the lowlands of Western Central Asia. And so consequently, in our territory, we have a number of textiles, we have a number of wooden objects, we have a number of leather, and so on, including the documents. And these documents, first of all, are the documents discovered in 1932 on Mount Moog, which reflect the life of Devashtich, the last king of a Sogdian principality of Panjikent, and his retinue, which were who were devastated by Arabs in 7 22. So, and in my project here, I wanted to some extent, to compare this text with the later and archaeological sites with the later material, with ethnographical accounts and with local documents of 16th to early 20th century. But you know, with all the things, it's a risky thing to predict how it will turn around. And so when I came here, I thought that there are like 150 documents written in Persian, in Tajik in old script, one can say, which belong to the 19th century. But having worked with them, I realized that they are almost 3,000 ones, almost 3,000 documents. And so most of my time here I was spending reading these not so easy documents. So it's written in Persian, in handwriting, which is sometimes nice handwriting, sometimes bad handwriting, which is never completely clear handwriting. So not all the dots are there. So many dots are in any way lost, which are crucial for understanding. Yeah, and so that was, it appeared to be a big part of my work here. But I'm quite happy having done that. So I realized much better what happened in the 8th century, and so with this thing we can look at the history of the region in longue durée.
Mm-hmm. So, can you give us some precise examples of these late documents, 19th century documents, which would be useful for some topics for understanding, I don't know, political or social or economic history of the 7th, 8th century region, the parallels, the oppositions also, the big discrepancies on the similarities, maybe in the field first of the elites on political life?
Yes, sure. These documents have very many similarities, so we can start with very elementary things, the economy, the crops which were grown there, and it appears that not only the list of crops, but also the percentage of crops, a little bit more of wheat rather than barley, was the same in the 7th, early 8th century and in the early 20th century. The only difference is the introduction of mulberry, which is quite important now. As for the political organization, I think that two sets of the late documents help us to understand how they ruled the government in the early medieval period was organized. So in these documents, we always have the reference to the judge courts, Darul Qaza, which were located at 6 or 7 regions, small petty region there. And so if we project it into the 8th century, we realize that the principalities of the 8th century were basically the same. So the areas which were covered by these or those judge courts reflect the conditions of the small principalities, Huvu called, in Sogdian, which appear in the 8th century and which are, of course, reflecting the real natural conditions of different valleys.
And to go back to the crops, I think I've read somewhere that the introduction of potatoes was a major change. It was in 19th century, or is it in your documents? Or?
No. Yes, so this, you are completely right that a potato changed life without no less than it changed life. So from the elders in several villages, I heard the words that it was hunger, it was starvation before the potatoes. So the potatoes, indeed, they changed life, but it happened later. So even in the documents of early 20th century, we don't see potatoes.
Okay.
The Russians didn't introduce potatoes after the colonization of Central Asia. It took place later in Soviet times.
And as regard trade, because it's something like a dead end, actually, because the mountains on both sides are very high. So what do you have as regard trade to the south, maybe to the passes to Bactria? or maybe along the valley the difference. I mean, the main town in the valley was Penjikent in the Upper Valley. So, do you have some examples in the 8th century documents, and maybe in the 19th century documents of trade in goods or whatever?
Yeah, so we have these documents. There are not so many, so they reflect mostly the transportation of items. So you're completely right that it was a sack. So in order to go farther to the east from Sogdiana or to the south, to the north, wherever, there are much more economical roads which go not through Zarafshan Valley but through the other parts. So in Zarafshan Valley, you have to make many traverse many mountain passes, which can be avoided with a little turn to the south or to the north. So it was not on the road, and interestingly, and even today, the bazaars, the marketplaces, are quite few there. So there is now one or two, and in the 19th, early 20th century, there were also no bazaars. So the things were just kind of ordered from somewhere and brought. So we have documents how somebody was bringing tea at that time, quite an expensive commodity, which was available only for the upper upper class of the society. How he imported it from Samarkand, and what were the wages of transportation, and so on. And in the 9th century documents, equally, we see a big number of lists of the delivery. There is the delivery of natural products, which are always close distance, yeah, so 5-10 kilometers around Mount Moog, of wheat, of barley, of wine, of kind of beans. And also we have lists of delivery of military equipment, of farmer, and the delivery and distribution of textiles, of clothes, which are also quite numerous. And we find them also in these 19th century documents. So in a set of them are part of the archive of Pochohaja, who was the last independent ruler of the uppermost part of the valley of Macha. And so he was in a very complicated situation. So he was waiting, he was expecting Russian conquest in the area. But nevertheless, in many of these documents, he was not only speaking about military issues, which is quite clear, but about the preparation of a marriage. And this preparation of a marriage was the request to buy and transport a great number of textiles. So the guests on the marriage ceremony, they were gifted with some textiles. Well, there is also a transportation of some unusual objects. So of a falcon, a bird, a hunting bird. Mm-hmm. So that was it. And so it was like a delivery today. So it was just in the magazine. You just note, I want this, and it was brought without going to a shop, without going to a market, to a bazaar.
As regards the most precious goods, as far as I remember, in the Montmook documents of the 8th century, we can see some precious stones. The Wastich, the king of Penjikent, has the right to receive some stones from people coming from the mountain, we suppose. Do we have these kind of things in the 19th century's documents?
No, we don't have the documents about these precious stones. And I would say that in the Mount Mook documents, or in one of them for sure, there are precious stones, the yakut, the granite. The other explanations of precious stones are now, by the way, questioned in the recent article by Alisher Bigmatov. Yeah. So no, we don't have that precious stones in the early periods, in the late periods.
And as we get, you just mentioned marriage. Do we see? So there was in between there was the Islamization of the region, but we do have some marriage contract one marriage contract in the Mahmud document. And more generally in Central Asia, we have a lot of marriage contracts from the pre-Islamic period. And I imagine that in your 19th century documents, you have a lot of detail of the status of women, of children, and so on.
Well, that's a quite interesting thing, which I cannot really explain why we don't have marriage contracts in these late documents. We just don't have anyone. So there are some documents which are permissions for mullah to make a marriage, and mostly of colonial period, but that's it. So I don't know why. So from one side, the Islamic law, it had a very strict norms concerning the marriage. So it was all described with very exactly in Sharia, and these ideas could not really change. But on the other side, the amount of mahar of the bride price was different, so it had to be noticed. But unfortunately, we don't have that. On the contrary, we have around 25 divorce documents. So we know that in Islam divorce is quite easy, yeah, to say the word talaq 3 times and that's it. But nevertheless, it is usually considered that in this traditional Islamic society, divorce was something abnormal. However, there are plenty of them, and sometimes they are quite interesting. One of them is really a romantic case, I would say. The story is that there was somebody who was, I don't give his name, in the late 19th century, who was said to be Arab by origin and Kyrgyz by lifestyle, which means that he had a nomadic lifestyle. And at some point, he realized that his wife engaged in the secret marriage with another guy. And so with that, he came to the trial, and because it was not his zin but her zin, he asked for divorce and he asked for money. And the money was quite large, so there were 10 golden coins. Golden coins were something. His wife agreed, and her new future husband and his brothers gave that amount to this Arab Kyrgyz, who left, and so a big amount. And then what was her next question to the judge, which is recorded in the protocol? She asked, how much time is it needed between the divorce and the second marriage? So she was really looking forward for the marriage with her secret husband. So the situations like that existed in the quite difficult to access areas.
In the Sogdian documents, we have a provision for divorce,
yes,
for separation in case of if the husband or the wife are captured by nomads. Mm-hmm. And is there any trace of nomadism in your 19th century documents? Because in the 8th century documents, there are a few traces.
Yeah.
The Shegan and so on, maybe a nomad general or this kind of thing, are supposed to be receiving some good pastures. So, do you have some traces of nomadism in your 19th century documents? Even the falcon, the gift of a falcon, which is very much important in nomadic life. But.
So there are, but they're quite few. So most of the population in that 19th century period are quite homogeneous. So they were Tajiks, speaking Tajik Iranian language, and the nomads who are in Central Asian context, usually the speakers of Turkic languages in the medieval period and the recent past. So they are not mentioned very often, but I would expect that in the many of military detachments here and there were some people of nomadic origin. So one of these documents which pertains also to the time of Russian conquest. It is 1868. So it was a spy report. A spy report. The spy was sent from Matcha, from the Upper Zarafshan, to Uratube, which is a lowland, relatively rich city to the north. And so he had to collect the information how the life changed with the new government, with the Kafirs, infidels, Russian commandant, they say, which is commandant. So he couldn't get much information. He just wrote how the feast of the end of Ramadan month turned out to be. So the Qaza, so the mullah, Qazi came to this commandant and asked for permission. He said, okay. Then in the morning, the Russians stood into the row in front of the mosque. The local population made their feast namaz, and then the population went away and the soldiers, the Cossacks, went away. So that's it. So it's all what he could collect. But from the very peculiar type of writing, with where there is no finite verbs but only adverbs, it can be understood that his native language was Turkic and not Tajik.
And can you tell us more about the linguistic situation? Because it's not exactly in Matcha, not exactly in the uppermost valley, but in the lateral valley, the last remnant of a language, a cousin to the Sogdian language.
Yes, indeed. So one of the valleys, which is, I think, the poorest one among all of them, very high, in fact, very high elevation with very few trees and so on, where there is no fruit and berries at all. So there is a population called Yagnobi who speak an East Iranian language, which is related to ancient Sogdian. So Tajik Persian is Western Iranian and Yagnobi is Eastern Iranian. So they are completely different. Yeah, so it's like Norwegian and English. Yeah, so they're all both Germanic languages, but completely different, incomprehensible with one another. And indeed, in that small in that small area, this old language is still spoken. Yeah, so as you said, it's completely right that it is a cousin of Sogdian language. So in many, especially popular publications, it's called that Yagnobi is New Sogdian. But it is not the case. So the divergence between these languages, it took place just at the eve of Common Era, before all the important documents of Sogdian came to light. And moreover, I think an important point is the absence of loan words. So the Sogdians, who were great traders all over Eurasia, Silk Roads, whatever we like or dislike this term, so they had contact with everybody. So if they wanted to say lamp, they used Greek term lampter, dampter. If they wanted to say in, they used Chinese term dian, tim in Sogdian. If they wanted to say sea, they would use samudr, which is of Indian, samudri, which is of Indian origin, and so on and so on and so on. In Yagnobi, we have only one example of that, and that's what you like the word arc, which means verb, which is originally corvée, which is perhaps a loan from Akkadian, no less than Akkadian. So they were. It means that they were very little engaged into the large trade, into the large context. They were somehow mostly bound to this valley, and they were taken from time to time to do their corvée work outside.
And in your 19th century documents, we know that there are very few borrowing from Sogdian, generally in Persian, And you have attributed some of them to Bakhtian, actually, in one of your articles. But in your mountainous, I would say, Tajik, is it standard Tajik, or would you have slightly more borrowing from Sogdian or from Yagnob?
Yes, so that's true. So there is a number of borrowings which go from Sogdian and which are not attested in standard Tajik or standard Persian. So they are usually related to landscape or ordinary things. So one of the last things I discovered is a term for a tunnel, or which is in Sogdian Muri, and which is Muri in Macha, which means a narrow gorge, and in Yagnobi it's Muri, which means chimney, which is also a kind of pipe, things like that. So there is a number of these Sogdian loans inherited, and of course the toponymy.
The toponymy. And now, if we now turn to a different aspect of your activity, the archaeology, do you see some specific features in Isorak? So it's the town, the small town you are excavating up in the mountains. Some specific features of the architectures when compared to Penjikent or even Bukhara or whatever.
Yes, for sure. So I think so we can start from the organization of from the building materials. So we used to perceive that the stone architecture like this is a big thing, but the architecture in mud bricks and adobe bricks is something very simple and not really worth of being architecture even. In the mountain, the situation is different. So this mud brick is very good for its climatic condition. It makes more cool in summer and a bit warmer in winter. So the living quarters were and still are built in mud bricks. The other things are built in stone. Why? Because stone is more available there. So the stone is everywhere, but there are only a few places in the mountains where you can get a satisfactory loess to make adobe bricks. So in this mountain places, we see that the living rooms in the 8th century already were built of mud bricks. Also, the stones were used for the foundation, and the economic rooms and so on are built made of stones. Another feature which is also related to the natural environment, to the climate, is the presence of so-called capellas. So these so-called capellas, chapels, are the small rooms with a fire niche, which is often decorated with columns, things like that, and with podiums, which are called sufa in Central Asian archaeology, located at 3 other walls, and a very special way of entrance. So these rooms, they appear from time to time in the lowlands in Panjikent. In the highlands, however, they are a most common feature. So I think that 1/4 of the rooms excavated by now in Hisarak are this kind of capellas, chapels. And so a usual perception is that this pre-Islamic religion of Sogdiana was Zoroastrianism, or a variant of Zoroastrianism, Mazdaism. And in this religion, the worship of fire is a very important element. And that's, of course, true. So in many publications, it was thought that these rooms were kind of small capellas, chapels. That's where from the name comes, where there was a worship to the ancestor gods, things like that. But looking at the quantity of them, on the percentage, and on the organization of these rooms, which have very small ceilings, which can be 1.5 meters, no more, with these fire niches, with rich fire and so on, you can understand that these were the rooms just for winter, for spending time in the cold season. So from one side, the brushwood was not very easily available there, so mostly the dry dung was used. On the other side, it is quite cold there, so in Madrushka the climate is about what is today in Oslo or in Stockholm. Yeah, so a bit warmer than Petersburg, but anyway. And in Panjaken, the climate, the average temperature, yeah, at least, is something like Paris, and in Bukhara, it's something like Rome. So, and it's on the same latitude, yeah. So higher and lower. So it is cold, and they need to heat. So that's why how these rooms were built. And when we find these rooms, not at every household, just few of them, in Panjaken, closer to the lowland with the climate like Paris, we can suppose that these were the houses of the people who had some relation to the mountains.
And as a whole, what would you say about the relationship between the islands and the lowlands, both in the 8th century and in the 19th century, and maybe the evolution in this period? Were they entangled or?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. They were really entangled very much. So at the beginning of this study, I was somehow catched by illusion that there in the mountains we have something very, very archaic, which didn't change, which is far away from all the civilization and so on. So it is a kind of, I don't know, common perception of what happens in the mountains. But with working on this project, especially on the 19th century documents, I understood that many things from the lowlands, they came there and were introduced, and in this subject, the mountaineers were on par with lowlands, for example, excellent wood carvings. So also we have passports, the people going here and there as far as Peshawar for education. So they were learned mullahs, qazis, the judges, who were able to put together seven references to different law books in order to establish their conclusion. So they had access to these 7 law books. So these relations were, of course, very important, and for the 8th century we don't have the trajectories of the long distance, but we can presume that they were. So there are many, for example, pottery imports from the lowlands into the mountains. The mountains, the pottery is handmade, it's not wheel pottery. But when we find wheel pottery, which is like 25% of what we have at Hisarak, it is clear that it was imported from the lowlands. So these contacts were, and they are, and so these mountains supported the lowlands with its natural goods. It is gold, which is found in the river basin. Yeah, so the name of the river Zarafshan, it means the one giving gold, the one throwing out gold. So when you go to the riverbed and you took sand and look at it, there is some pieces of gold still there, so everywhere it is. Also, it's not economically very it doesn't give a great surplus towards gold. So only the poorest part of the community in 19th century were gold washers. So the ammoniac, Nushadur, which was produced in one particular place since 8th century. The first references is Tangshu, I think.
Weishu, maybe Weishu, I think.
So even earlier.
Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, and so which are described in late 19th century as well. So the same mode of production of this ammoniac, which means, which is Nushadur, eternal fire in Tajik, by the way. Some other products, and the mountaineers, of course, were dependent on many support from the lowlands, be it textiles. The simple textiles were produced there. The grain, which is still few there, which is not enough for a large population. So the limitations of the arable lands are very, very important issue there, and other things. So one of the comical, what looks comical to us is donkey. So donkey is the main animal of transportation there, and every family has donkey, but they don't grow up donkeys. So they buy adult male donkeys from the lowlands, because the donkeys, they have very strong sexual drive, I would say, and if a male donkey sees female donkey, he would not move, he would not work. Okay. So in that mountains, they are separated without their ladies to do hard job.
Okay. And you know, there have been these attempts to define the islands of Asia, especially of Southeastern Asia, but also the Himalaya, and up to the Iranian world, actually, up to the Pamir, as Zomia. It's the book by James Scott. It has been very much discussed in the last 10 to 15 years. What would you say about, on a more, not on a comparative level, what would you say about this idea of an island autonomy, island communities defining themselves against the central state in the lowlands?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Even initially when I when I proposed this project here, so it came to my mind after reviewing a collective volume on the possibility of using Scott's model on the territory of Afghanistan. And so I thought that most of the authors of this volume, they said that, well, it could be, but we don't have enough sources. The source material is not enough for a definitive conclusion. I thought that, well, in the Upper Zarafshan Valley, because of the presence of the documents 8th century to 19th century, because of very huge archaeological work and other studies, it is possible to give an answer to that question. And well, from my experience, from what I have done, it is the ideas expressed by Scott are sometimes they were. So in the very highland region of Zarafshan and Matcha, there was a quest for some independence, for some election of rulers, which we know in 1840s, in 1860s and 1870s, in 1920s, in the time of Basmaji, they also elected their their ruler, and all from the same village of Paldarak. So from one side it's true, from the other side the idea of escape of a large scale migration from the lowlands to the highlands in order to escape taxation, state religion, and so on, it is quite weakly documented here. So on the contrary, looking at some elementary things of the life, like on the pottery, well, our main sources in archaeology, the pottery, on the burial structures, and so on, it is clear that there were no large-scale movement from the lowlands to the highlands. That is true. On the contrary, there is many documentation for a short time escape in the mountains. That happened in Ustrushana, according to the Mount Mook documents, and it is happened in 19th century as well during the Russian conquest. But on the contrary, there is also a resettlement of the mountaineers in the lowlands. And it happened quite often, and the reason is the little availability of the land there. So the land of the mountains cannot provide food for more people than there is. So there is a clear limitation. You cannot expand agriculture. On the contrary, that movements are going back. So returning to the Scots model, so I think that even the internal data is not really the same. So in the Southeast Asia, in Zomia, his main main reason was slash and burn agriculture. So the people could go from one place, burn their the forest, make crops there, which will be very fruitful in the first several years, and then they had a possibility to go to the other place to burn forest there and make their crops and continue this semi-nomadic lifestyle, which is absolutely impossible in our case. So the sources are different. So my answer is perhaps more cautious about that. I think that Scots model, I'm not specialist, but I think it might work well in Burma, in the mountains of Burma, but hardly in our situation. So if we look altogether to the Iran and perhaps Turkic world to see if the models like that happened, so we can find similarity in the history of medieval Alans, who are Ossetians today, who were driven from the steppe, from the North Pontic and North Caucasian steppe into the Caucasus, into the mountains after 13th century, and who lost many elements of their earlier life. For example, we know that Alans had writing based on Greek script, which was completely lost, and Christianity of the Alans turned into some very specific combination of beliefs of the Ossetians before the second Christianizations by Georgians and by Russians in 19th century. Or perhaps the story of Yakuts, the Turkic people of the Sayan Mountains, who were driven out of their lands by the Mongols and who lived very much to the north. So they are the northernmost horse breeders in the world, and they live in the coldest place of the world, in fact. But in both these cases, they escaped not because of the bad behavior of government, but because of the new government. So they used to have their own state polity, at least, their own polity, which was driven away by the newcomers.
Thanks a lot for these wide-ranging comments, and thanks a lot for providing us with the first time and the first attempt to link the ancient documents and the more recent one, the first longue durée attempt to describe these high mountains of Central Asia. Thanks, Pavel.
Thank you very much, Étienne.